Humanity, a new religious call. Humanity, religion for us all. Humanity, now we all can see. Humanity, how much better we can be.
Hi, I'm Bill Van Fleet, and this is Humanianity Conversation number 102, recorded on February 10th, 2021. It is the 8th recorded conversation with David Whalen, an advocate for objectivism. This time, we focused on some of the foundational ideas of existentialism, attempting to understand them as deeply as possible. We talked especially about the concept of the meaning in one's life. Hi, Dave.
Hey, Bill, how you doing?
Well, pretty good, pretty good. How about you?
Good, good.
Last time, I think we decided that we would take a look at another belief system, existentialism, that you have found to have much merit, and to continue our working on understanding belief systems and so forth. Does that has anything else or different come to mind that you would rather do?
I mean, we could talk about existentialism. Um, it's a pretty fascinating philosophy, and it also encompasses psychology as well, and psychiatric work. Um, I've been reading a book by Viktor Frankl, who who came up with the logotherapy for psychiatric and psychotherapy, and he was an existentialist. Um, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him or not, uh, but he was a he was a Jew who lived in Vienna, Austria, during the time of the Nazis, and he survived four different concentration camps, even Auschwitz. He was at, and it was during that time, his 4 years in the concentration camps, that he wrote his um, logotherapy uh, based upon existentialism, and it's really fascinating uh, philosophy of life, and also a way to that he believed you could cure um, you could cure people by creating not creating but showing them the way that they could have meaning in life rather than just nihilism, giving up and thinking that everything was meaningless.
Okay, so I noticed there are uh, two words that are of that are significantly ambiguous. Um, so it would be logo and uh, and um, oh gosh, uh, I got distracted and let's see, what was the last thing you said?
I think I was talking about how he created logotherapy, that
Oh
he
yeah,
was.
no, now it's popped back. Uh, the word meaning.
Hmm.
So those are two foundational concepts um, already that we're dealing with. And so it will be interesting to explore those. Do you, uh, and would maybe, if it's okay, let's just take a few minutes to talk about those two things and then embark upon uh, existentialism and uh, see if we can develop a deeper understanding of it. You have a deeper understanding of existentialism than I do, and so it'll be interesting. So, what does the logo mean?
Well, Viktor Frankl had it's actually a Greek term that means like um, the reason, or like the reason logo, kind of like the reason of our existence, therapy. So so for example, this is a really good example. He would distinguish between someone trying to find the purpose of life versus someone trying to find meaning in life. And so some people would say, like, for example, his famous statement, I believe, was, instead of asking what does what is like the purpose of existence, instead ask, what does existence ask of me? And so so for example, if someone was to say, well, I'm trying to find what the purpose of life is, that's totally different from trying to find a meaning in life. And the meaning in life is not the same for every human. Meaning, someone can find a meaning in life on just daily tasks, daily things, certain callings, to bigger things, uh, where someone trying to find the purpose of life, uh, meaning like trying to find what's the purpose of why we're here on this earth. What's the purpose of evil? What's the purpose of good? What's the purpose of anything? Well, those kind of questions can be endless and possibly never answered. So for example, if you had a um, maybe an agnostic who was asking, what's the purpose of life? Why are we here? Well, that kind of thinking and that kind of attempt to discover, Viktor Frankl would say, you're never going to find that. But what you can do is find meaning. So here's a really good example that he uses. Um, when he was in the concentration camps under the Nazis, one of the things he did to survive was that he was able to find scraps of paper, and someone stole a pencil for him, and he would um, write his book. He had actually written a book ahead of time before he was put in a concentration camp, but it was unfinished, and it was on his logotherapy ideas. And this gave him a purpose, like a meaning. He needed to finish. He needed to finish this book, but now he found a meaning to fulfill. And through those 4 years he was in the concentration camps, he would secretly write this book on these scraps of paper, and he would observe the other inmates, the other people, the other Jews, of who was surviving, who wasn't, why a person would just give up while other people survived, etc. And so, and then he actually worked with a lot of these people too, because he was a neurologist and a psychiatrist. He was sent to help with medical issues as well. And so he got to observe all these things and talk to these other prisoners. Um, but after the war was over, he started his practice again in Vienna, and he met a Orthodox Jew who was suffering from despair, and he wanted to give up on life. And so Dr. Frankel asked him, said, "What's the problem?" He said, "Well, I survived Auschwitz concentration camp, but my wife and my two daughters were murdered by the Nazis in their concentration camps. And I know with the Jewish religion, my two daughters are with God now in a very peaceful place." And so Dr. Frankel, being a Jew, understood what he was talking about. He said, well, isn't that a good thing? He said, "No, it's the worst thing, because I have been a bad man all my life. And I've done a lot of terrible things, and I'm not a good man. I have a lot of vices and things. And I know that because of the way I live and things I've done in my life, I'll never see my two daughters." So Dr. Frankel said, "Well, you're searching for purpose right now. You're asking, well, why did God have this? Why did God make me survive and my daughters die? Instead, you should be looking at it this way. You were spared. You survived so that now you can change your life and live a life now that will be worthy, that one day when you die, you'll see your two daughters." And then the man said, changed his life. He said, "Yes, I can change. Now I know what to live for." And so that's a good example of existential finding meaning versus trying to find purpose.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. A good description. Um, I think there's still some ambiguities in it that maybe we could eliminate. Uh, People ask, uh, what is the purpose of X? Uh, what is the purpose of your eating a particular thing? Or what is the purpose of your going to where you're going today? It's sort of like, why are you doing it? What is the purpose of your doing it? And what that implies is that um, there is an agent, namely you, or me, or whoever we're talking about, that wants to do something in order to accomplish something. Why are you doing it? In order to accomplish fill in the blank. Does that sound right with regard to purpose?
Yeah, purpose, I think I was thinking about that today. It's that purpose it does ask the question why. I think that's the big thing. And so on smaller levels that have to do with
I'm
things that,
sorry. I'm sorry.
yeah,
It does or does not.
it does. It asks the question why. Purpose asks the question why. And so we know, like, for example, on smaller things, like if you say, if my child says, "Why does daddy go to work?" Well, I can explain that. It's because something I know, it's something I do actually do in reality. But if a child was to ask me, "Do angels exist?" Or "Why are there angels?" Well, I don't know why, and I don't know if there are. Those are things that I can't answer.
Yeah, and by the way, um, what we're do angels exist? That would be a question where the answer would be an existential belief. What exists, has existed, might or will exist in the future or doesn't exist, and how it works and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Um,
Exactly.
the but again, we're getting and by the way, that is as opposed to an ethical belief about what should be done or should not be done. Um, that's a very basic kind of understanding in my mind, and it's not necessarily a clearly differentiated concept in other people's minds. Um, but at any rate, so the uh, when asking what the purpose is of something, it is generally what we're referring to is uh, what is the reason that an agent is engaging in or has engaged in or is going to engage in a particular kind of behavior. So, um, what is your purpose of doing such and such? Well, it's in order to accomplish so and so. That seems to be the kind of the basic fundamental idea of purpose.
Hmm.
So then when we ask the question, uh, what is the purpose of life, or what is the purpose of my life? One of the first things we have to ask is what the agent is. In other words, and what is the purpose of life? We're making an assumption that there is an agent that has created this thing called life and has done so for a reason in order to accomplish something. Uh, and of course, accomplishing uh, something could be simply accomplishing feeling good. Uh, I do this particular game because it makes me feel good. That's my purpose in doing it, making me feel good. So, so first of all, with purpose, there's the implication that there's an agent and that the agent is engaging in something, has done something, or is thinking about it, or whatever, and it would be doing it in order to accomplish something, in order to fill in the blank. And so to ask what is the purpose of life, then we have to ask who the agent is. And of course, uh, I think this is very much connected to the concept of a God that is, has created things that wants to accomplish this, that, and the other, and then to be able to say, well, that's good, or I like that, and so on, which, of course, biblical Christianity has some of that in it. So,
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And what I find fascinating about existentialism is that a lot of them were atheists or deists. And so, for example, one of the founding fathers of existentialism, Nietzsche, he was an atheist, and he was the one who wrote the book that God is dead. And he was talking about that these religions that were made by man had served their purpose for a time, but now they're no longer needed. That um, we as humans um, can use our rationality and our freedom of choice to find meaning in life. So, um,
Well,
They then, yeah,
now you're talking about meaning. We were talking
right.
about
So
purpose.
yeah, yeah. So they would say this. They would get away from purpose, and existentialists really emphasize meaning instead. That was their thing because they believe that with purpose on higher things, that you would waste a lot of your life trying to find that. Um, but now they didn't. Now that doesn't mean they weren't for science. They loved science. They loved physics. They loved all the things that the scientists did in medical and in physics and everything like this and mathematics. And they said that's what man needs to do. But to uh, to try to find the purpose of why we're here, or if there's a God and what's his plan, etc. The existentialist said that's those are questions you're not going to know the answer to. Instead, what we have is our existence here. And so it's very important that humans, because the way we're made and our nature, that um, we need to find a meaning in life.
Okay, so now let's try to figure out what that that means. Um, in my understanding, the primary use of the word, excuse me, meaning is um, the definition of a word. So, what is the meaning of such and such word? Well, the meaning is, or the definition is, and so on. And what that is our symbolic language. It's that we have learned and become able to develop symbols that stand for certain things in the minds of those people agreeing to that definition. And so, in other words, we humans have started using words, uh, quote, similarly, uh, like that the word table um, would mean pretty much the same thing to most everyone, in that if one pointed to a chair, the word table would not come to mind. So there's that whole process of definition and meaning to symbols that uh, that seems to be to make use of the word meaning in a most usual way. Now, if I were to ask, well, what is the meaning of life? Well, then you would give perhaps the biological definition, and I'm not sure exactly what that would be. And of course, there is actually a lot of um, disagreement about what life is. Like, well, when does when does the life of an individual begin, and so on, and what does that mean? What is it that is beginning? That would be the definition of life. Um, so um, um, to ask the question, what is the meaning of my life? Well, one would come up with uh, something like, well, however life is defined, but confined to oneself and maybe therefore to one's body or something like that. But that's obviously not the way the word meaning is being used when people are talking about finding meaning in life. It's a different meaning for the word meaning, it seems to me. So, what is, if you agree with that, then what is that second meaning? Um,
Yeah, their meaning, the existentialists, they use that word a lot. That 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 a person needs to find meaning in their life, and that means to find value in their life, to create value in their life. Um,
so, we have to look at value, then the word value.
yeah, and so finding meaning is to create value. So, for example, um, and Kierkegaard, in a real simple way, would say that, for example, back in his day in Denmark, a knight would rescue a damsel in distress, and then she would fall in love with him. Then he would see her beauty, and he would fall in love with her. Now, his life, his meaning now is to protect her and love her and take care of her. And his love for this woman is his value. So now she is his meaning in life, what he's going to live for. Um,
Okay. So, um, is it not pretty close to meaning the same thing as wanting something? And so, like a motivational state, I
yeah,
want
yeah,
to do such and such. And by the way, our sentences model uh, our beliefs and our other our beliefs, let's say, and um, the our existential beliefs and the belief models something about presumably about reality. It's a model of the way things are, or something like that. Um, and um, a motivational state, well, a belief is usually modeled by I believe that da 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 da, and there's a sentence there, and that sentence is a model of what the belief is. And then people leave out the I believe that, and they just say the da 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 da, but they mean I believe that such and such. Okay, motivational state. These are uh, terms that I have felt are closest to what we uh, actually all could agree upon as far as meaning is concerned. And a motivational state would be the wanting to do something. Um, uh, so hunger would be modeled by I want to eat. Um, uh, the uh, um, itching would be I want to scratch. But also, I want to see more of you. I want to make more money, whatever it is. And you could say, you could ask the person, well, why? what is the purpose? And it would be wanting to accomplish. I want to make more money. Why? Because I want to do such and such, and it requires money. So, in order to do such and such, I want it. And uh, so, um, this this particular uh, meaning of the word meaning seems to be referring to a motivational state. In other words, what and so therefore, when people talk about uh, having meaning in life, it means, in my mind, being motivated to do things. And of course, when people lose all of their motivation to do anything, then they are ready to exit because life has no quote value or quote meaning. It seems to me that uh, that's the meaning of that. Uh,
Yeah, I would say that, like, to use another way of saying it is that it kind of goes more than to just, it goes a lot deeper than just wanting, if you're hungry, you want to eat something. And this is more as to a finding a reason to live and to live life to the fullest. So there are motivations, but it's more than that. It goes deeper than that. Um,
why is not that the same thing? It's just not as um, what would you call it? Not as primitive like hunger and so forth, but wanting to get a good education, uh, wanting to find the cure of such and such, uh, wanting to um, to win at the Olympics. Um, the basic thing is wanting to do something. So it seems to me that meaning in life means wanting to do things. And those things can be of different sorts, of course.
yes,
Some of
and
which you and I would approve of, and some of which you and I would not.
yeah, so and that's what the existentialists talk about. They say that, so like if someone would say, "What's the meaning of life?" Well, I can't tell you. You have to find that for yourself because it's going to be different for everybody
Mhm.
because we're all different. That's just why humans. That's who we are. What I might find is meaningful to me will not be meaningful to you. So uh, they break it down into like three different categories of meaning. There's action. There's certain actions we take to accomplish things on a daily basis, or short-term goals, or things that we do. We can find meaning in that. For example,
Well, when you say find meaning in it, see there the word usage becomes a little bit ambiguous. Um, the you're saying though that the first meaning meaning of this uh, set of meanings that we're talking about, as opposed to definition, uh, that the first is going to be wanting to do things in a in the near future, something like that,
or on
maybe.
a daily, just on a daily basis, like your job, um, let's say being a father,
Hmm.
a husband. Um, there's just action things that we do that we find meaning in, and then we live for those things.
No, when you say find meaning in, then that makes it seem like it's something different. But what you're listing is things that one wants to do. one wants to do certain things having to do with fatherhood, or one wants to go to work. And so those are part of that person's meaning in life. Am I correct about that?
Right. Because they do find a difference where um, there's this idea of herd mentality. So someone can grow up in their culture and do things because it's expected of them, but not because there's any meaning in their life to them. So, um,
That sounds like ethics now.
right. So it is very ethical. So the existentialists they say it is an ethical situation because
I'm,
you can
I'm
have a
think I think I'm talking about something a little different. Uh, when you talk about quote herd mentality, um, to me, what I think you mean is going along with the culture, and so um, uh, it means the way some people would say it would be, uh, I don't really want to do it, but I believe I should. And how they got the ethical belief that they should do it would be ultimately from the culture that they have been molded by. It sounds like to me.
Mhm, correct, and and so the existentialists would say that's not really finding meaning. You're just going along with what you believe is expected of you. And so people can be stuck in that, not really, they can be depressed and have a job and have just a meaningless life. They're nihilists. They think this is just I do this to just exist, but I'm not really living. And
Yeah, so
so
you brought in the word depression, and indeed, I think that is, well, there are different kinds of depression, but um, a significant part of depression is not wanting to do anything, loss of motivational states, not being able, primarily because of not being able to derive joy from any activity. It doesn't feel good. I do it because I have the belief that it is the right thing to do. And so that's why I'm doing it, but I don't feel otherwise like doing it. I'm motivated. I want to do it because I believe it's the right thing to do, but I don't want to do it for any other reason. And so that's a part, of, I think, of what some kinds of depression
mm,
consist of.
yeah, and also boredom, and we see that more in our the youth as we get more technology in. Kids seem to be younger generation seems to be more bored, and boredom can lead to a life of meaninglessness, which is a big problem that a lot of psychotherapists deal with today on a
What
daily
is
basis.
boredom? What is boredom?
From what I understand, boredom is where you're just not doing anything. There's um, no wanting to discover things, to learn things, to uh, better yourself. It's just, you
Well,
know,
there's see what you're describing is the um, lack of motivational states, just not wanting to do anything. But my impression is that boredom has a special unpleasant quality to it. That there is a negative feeling associated with it. I'm not sure about that. Um, uh, s- uh, when, Times when people say they are bored, they feel restless and they move a lot, I think. Does that sound right? A person being bored and therefore pacing back and forth or something like that?
No, I think maybe with the existentialists when they use the boredom, because these guys were writing in the late 1800s. I think what they meant is more of a maybe a word that we would use today would be lazy, but lazy mentally maybe, or lazy, well, it could be physically and mentally. Just life just doesn't. There's just nothing to do kind of
Okay,
attitude.
so that would be lack of motivational states.
Mhm. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. I think lack of motivation, um, but that life itself becomes boring. And
Yeah, we're talking about boring. What does it boring mean? Oh, what life itself? Well, uh,
like there's nothing to live for. There's nothing exciting to live for. So it goes back to motivation, but even
person,
strong, yeah,
yeah, the person does not want to do anything. They can't get any joy out of doing something.
correct, correct. Um, so another interesting point that the existentialists talk about with finding uh, meaning is experiences with people. They talk about um, meeting someone that you find really interesting, and the discussions you have with them, and it's just you find a lot of meaning in that. Art, you find uh, paintings that just bring things to life for you, or certain expressions that you just like, wow, this is great, or we could say in our day a movie that just um, man, that just was really a great experience. It really moved me, or something, or a good book. So they would say that we find meaning in the experiences that we encounter on a daily basis in our lives as well, and then we
So
can
are we,
hold. Yeah,
so are we talking here about um, the ability to experience joy? In other words, the positive feeling that we get when we are doing something that we quote enjoy. Um, that when that ability to experience joy goes away, then the person has no meaning in their life. Uh, Using this uh, definition of meaning, uh,
no, no, it wouldn't be temporal in this situation. What they're talking about, this experience would be something that would, for them, joy is an emotional response based upon, it could be temporal, but it could also be something that's very meaningful to them. But in their idea of this experience of finding meaning in life through experiences is something that would last for the rest of their life, not a temporal, not a temporal, not something temporal. So, for example, if I saw a piece of
by,
artwork.
by temporal you mean temporary, right?
Right, right, just temporary. So, like for example, let's say I watched a funny movie and I laughed and I thought it was funny, but it really has no meaning to me in my life.
Mm-hmm.
It was just for that 2 hours, and now it's over.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say I find a painting, and um, for example, one of my favorite paintings is of one of Isaac Newton, where he's showing his works to these people and to these children, and they're all looking at him in awe and wonder. And the meaning of that to me is profound, and it's something that now has meaning to me, that I want to hold on to this. It's not temporal. It means something to me because of what he
Temporal.
did.
Okay, not temporary. So is that, I'm not sure about the use of the word temporal, what
Well,
that,
temporal is another word for temporary. That's what I mean by temporal. It's
oh,
temporary.
okay. So they
Yeah.
mean the same thing in this
Yeah.
discussion.
Right. Right. So experiences that have value, that have meaning to someone, is something that they want to hold onto. But the last one that I think is the most important one that the existentialists talk about is the attitude of meaning. Now, this one is the most important to them because finding meaning through your attitude is very similar to what the Stoics held, that ancient philosophy. So, for example, in Stoicism, you would make a judgment on how to handle a situation that came about. And your judgment on how you handle that situation would determine um, um, how you would make your choices and view that situation. And in existentialism, it's very similar. So, for example, Dr. Frankl, he would say that there were times when he was like skin and bones, and he had typhus. And he almost died, and the SS guard would ask him, um, were you a doctor? And he'd say, yes. And he said, I bet you made a lot of Jew money off that, didn't you? And then he would take a pistol, hit him in the side of the head, and knock him out. And then Frankl said he would stand right back up. And the guy would hit him again. And he would stand right back up. His attitude was that this man is beating me, and this is terrible, and I'm starving, I'm dying right now. But there's something inside of me that he can't take away, and I'm not going to let him have it. Dr. Frankl would say it was his soul, but it's who he was. And so, this attitude, even in this terrible situation, that he decided he was going to have dignity regardless of what this Nazi officer was doing to him. His attitude in this had meaning. And so,
Okay,
yeah.
so now I was wondering what the word attitude means. Uh, I know that sometimes people are referred to as having an attitude. My current picture of that is that it has to do with uh, the phenomenon that exists in us hominids and other social animals. Uh, the uh, the tendency to struggle for dominance or to avoid submission, and that varies from individual to individual and also from situation to situation for various reasons. But essentially, it's I will make you submit. No, you won't. I will stand up to you. I will win this rather than you. If you cause me to do such and such, then you have won. If you are unable to cause me to do such and such, then you have lost and I have won. And so it's the tendency that we all have to engage in struggles for dominance. Um, so that that is uh, what I kind of understand to be one of the meanings of attitude.
I would think the existentialists would say instead it's a struggle for life, not dominance. There was no way Frankl could win in the situation. But what he could do is if he was going to die or go to the gas chamber or whatever, he was going to go with the dignity of who he was.
Yes, okay, so what does that mean? The dignity of what he was. What does it mean, definition wise? The uh, it seems to me like it is verbalized at times as you can't make me, okay? You can't make me do such and such, fill in the blank. You can't make me give up. You can't make me cry. You can't make me obey, or you can't make me um, give up something that I value, that gives me pleasure, and so forth. So uh, that sounds like what we're talking about here, the meaning of attitude. Um, that it's uh, the refusal to submit, the refusal to give up, uh, the uh, when I die, I will not have given up. I
But
will.
it's not without meaning, though. And let me, this is a good example what I'm talking about. So, this is a really classic example. In the French Indochina War, that was in the 1950s between the French and the Vietnamese. After the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, the French surrendered to the Vietnamese and were taken to these prison camps. But there were two different soldiers that were in the French army. They were the French Foreign Legionnaires, and then the regular French army. Now, the French Foreign Legion, they were mercenaries. So they were from Germany. A lot of them were German soldiers from World War II and other countries. But these men um, were escaping some a life of crime or other things, or they didn't have a family, or they just like to kill people. So the Foreign Legion would take these men in. The regular French army, these men were different. They were French. They were they had families back home. They were doing this for the cause of France. And that's why they signed up to fight. Well, in the prison camp, they found that the regular French soldiers, most of them survived the tortures and the starvation that the Vietnamese were doing to them. But the Legionnaires, just about every one of them died during the captivity. And they found that the reason why is because the Legionnaires had nothing to live for. Their whole life was just fighting. And now that it was over, they just gave up. But the regular French soldiers, they had wives, children, girlfriends, their country, their families. They had things that meant a lot to them to come back to, that they wanted to see again. So they did everything they in their wills to stay alive. And they actually, a lot of them did. They made it back to France. But so this is more than just um, a a fight to defeat someone else. It's a preservation of self, but has to have meaning, because if you don't have meaning, the Legionnaires were very tough men. The Legion to this day is one of the hardest military forces you can join. So they weren't like weak men, but in these certain circumstances, when it came to meaning, these guys had no meaning, so they just gave up and they all died.
Let me see if I'm hearing it correctly. The Legionnaires derived much of their meaning, in other words, were mostly motivated by uh, the wanting to fight and win. And then when they were in a situation where that was extremely important, as opposed to um, the feelings of attachment, wanting to be with other people and to engage in mutually pleasurable things with other people and so forth. And so the ones who had little or no attachment to other people and whose motivational states were primarily the tendency to fight, let's say, to struggle for dominance, um, when they were in a situation where that was not possible, then uh, that motivational state um, could not be fulfilled. And so that led to more of a breakdown and so on, because they could not look forward to something else that they would nevertheless have. Whereas others who had relationships with other people, and where that was very important to them, uh, did have something to live for, to want. And that, uh, so, so the Legionnaires were deprived of their um, need to or wanting to fight, to to display dominance behavior, to engage in struggling for dominance, uh, whereas others who were um, primarily motivated to interact with other people in ways that led to feeling good and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
They had something to, quote, live for, i.e., a purpose, namely to get back to um, such a life where uh, that was indeed going to be possible.
Yeah, and that's a good way of putting it. Um, there was another story that I read with Dr. Frankl where he was in Dachau concentration camp, and he was taking. They had a typhus breakout, and so the Nazis wanted him to care for the Jewish prisoners as they were dying, and he met these two that were just crying. They wanted to give up. They were just asking to be killed. Just kill me now before I go to the gas chambers. And one was a woman, and he was talking to her, and he said, "Why do you want to give up? Why do you want to just die?" And she said, "Because I have two daughters. They're in another concentration camp, and I don't know what's going to happen to them, and I can't bear the thought that they could die over there. I'd never see them again." And so Dr. Franklin said, "Well, what if you survived and they survived? Then you can find them after this is over." And she said, "Yes, that's right, I could." And she changed her attitude, and as she actually got healthier, her mental capacity made her body get healthier, and she ended up surviving. And then he met this man who was a scientist, and he was an older gentleman, And because he was older, um, his body couldn't take, and because he was a scientist, he wasn't like physically fit. And so the concentration camp was taking a toll on his body physically. And he was very weak and he just wanted to die. And so Dr. Frankel was talking to him and asked him, what did you do before this and stuff? And he told him, and he said, is there anything in your life that has any meaning? He said, well, before the Nazis captured me, I was writing these books on this medical science that I was working on, whatever it was, but I never got to finish it. But it, but I know what I was working on could cure a lot of people in the world. So Dr. Frankel said, "What would it be good if you just gave up now and you died, and no one got to read your work? You never got to finish it, and so all these people died because they didn't get to see your work. What if you got to finish that work and saved millions of lives because of what you have discovered and finished? Wouldn't that be something great?" And the man said, "Yes, it would. I need to finish my work." So he ended up living. He survived the concentration camps because now he said, "I have to finish my work."
Mhm.
So um, that is,
In that case, the joy uh, was obtained in the fantasy or prediction that one would indeed be able to make a contribution to other people, to lots of other people, that one had something to give to other people, and if one stayed alive, and worked continuously at it, it was something to give uh, to other people or to give back to other people.
right, to find a meaning. So that, for example, like what you do with your website and your Humanianity project, there is a meaning in your life for that you are living out and and working on a daily basis, and having discussions with other people and the other groups you host, like we do on Sunday nights and so forth. Um, this is what the existentialists would call, this is your meaning in life. One of them. There's because you can have more than just one meaning in life. You can have different ones, um, smaller ones, bigger ones, etc. Um, so
Many things I want to do
right, that you, yeah,
that
yeah,
I want to do because of the joy produced by doing so,
yeah, you could say that. Um,
or the pleasurable feeling, uh, yes, I am doing something good. And some of it would be, could be, have to do with ethics. Like, I believe that I should be as uh, hardworking as possible, or as friendly as possible, or as helpful as possible, or something like that. And so one can be motivated to do that. Doing what one believes to be the right thing can avoid the bad feeling of refraining from doing so or doing otherwise.
mhm.
It also can produce a good feeling uh, that just like the small child, is reinforced uh, in two ways: by making the child feel bad and making the child feel good. Shapes the child's behavior, makes the child believe I should not do these things and I should do these things.
Yeah, and I think one of the one interesting thing that I found so far in reading, especially like Heidegger and Sartre and Nietzsche, was, and some people don't like this, that's what they didn't like about the existentialists, is the reason why they didn't like organized religion was that organized religion mandated a meaning of life and values for you that you never got to create and discover on your own. And they believed, the existentialists, they believed that humans need to create value through finding what is meaningful to to that person. And and that's not going to be the same for everybody. But if you are forced to say, let's say, this is the meaning, this is your meaning of life, this is what you got to do, and you really don't naturally, or you have no desire for it, or want that, or think that brings you any joy or happiness, you may be just going through the motions of life because this is what you're told that you have to have joy in or meaning in, and it really may not be. And you could then end up living a meaningless life. So for the existentialist, someone in that state is someone who's basically dead already because the life is meaningless now. And so um, that was one of their main ideas, and it brought a lot of controversy on them at the time back in that day.
Yeah,
Um,
I can see why. In the first place, it gives a stereotyped negative view of religion. Uh, Religion indeed has all of those negative things in it, but it has positive things in it too. And uh, well, there was another point. uh, the oh yes, um, the individuals taking this negative stance toward religion. Oh well, religion uh, makes you do things uh, that it considers to be the things to do. And whereas if you get free of that, then you can choose your own. I think that that's kind of what you're saying. And but the thing is, when you choose your own, it is coming from your own ethical belief system that you have acquired from the cultural um, molding that has occurred ever since you were an infant by the culture around you. So,
right. Yeah. No. No. You're right, and they do talk about that. So, for example, um, Nietzsche, he was really adamant that humans had to become higher beings, and at the same time create a higher culture, a culture that would embody this idea of humans becoming what they would call self, um, becoming. They would say, they would use the term to be, and what someone was to be is different for every person. So they sought to create a culture that would embody that thinking, and so they would say that your freedom to do these things are limited if the culture you grow up in, the family you're raised in, there's a religion that your family believes in, uh, um, could put um, uh, like kind of like enclose you a little bit more than someone who doesn't have those things on them. Um, and so, but the one thing with the religions, it's not like, for example, Kierkegaard really loved the teachings of Jesus. He thought Jesus was a great philosopher and that there was a lot of great things. But what they were all against was when it comes to what is known as a religion, the problem is that those religions believe it comes from their deity. And if their deity says it, it must be obeyed. And that's what they had a problem with, because what if that religion is wrong, or it's made up and it's really not from a deity, then you're forcing people to do something that may be against their will, but they're doing it out of fear of going to hell or being punished by the deity, when the whole time it was created by man. Uh, uh, so
But our
um,
religions are just our creation of social families. It's a part of our tribalistic tendency that we uh, tend to develop attachment to certain people and then to regard others as outside of that group
mm,
and so on. Um, but that's a part of us. That's not religion is just a manifestation of that. It is not the cause of it. Um, there's uh, a part of our tribalism um, is what produces this tendency to turn against such and such group. And so we have people turning against, quote, religion, uh, when, of course, there are bad things in the religions and there are good things in the religions. They are not all the same, nor are the people in a particular religion all the same. Um, but it is just the way in which our tribalism uh, manifests itself, and our, uh, uh, not just tribalism, but uh, more fundamental than that is a kind of a need to uh, have attachment,
mm,
interaction with other people, and um, interaction with other people is always hazardous because we humans so easily can slip into the need for to engage in struggle for dominance. Which one of us is going to be uh, the leader and which the follower, and so on? Are you going to do what I want you to do, or do I have to do what you want me to do? And so on, all of that sort of thing. Um, but the other part of it is the attachment, the mutual grooming is what comes to mind. You know, thinking of uh, chimpanzees and others, other species, and so forth. How do they make each other feel good? And so we make each other feel good through mutual grooming on our cell phones and in our social media and so on. Um, Somebody says something and somebody else likes it. That's an act of mutual grooming. Uh, well, mutual when the other person says, uh, I knew you would agree because you're such a great person. So they're making each other feel good. And just like chimpanzees make each other feel good more in a physical way, they can't do it verbally. They don't have language.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And uh, Carl Jung, and then in modern times, Jordan Peterson, who's a famous psychologist,
Yeah.
they in his book, The Maps of Meaning, which is based on Carl Jung's research, they talk about how all the ancient civilizations have identical religions. They all basically have the same elements. If it's the Assyrian beliefs or the Egyptian beliefs, what the Chinese believed, or the Jews, etc., they seem to all have the same basic elements. But what Jordan Peterson talks about is that these religions, like you were talking about, were created as a safety to the culture or the tribe or whatever it was at the time, or the nation, um, to safeguard them against the unknown. And so, for example, they saw the lights in the sky, and so they would make up that the gods put them there. These were whatever and so forth. Like the Vikings would say, Odin placed these lights in the sky for us to navigate the seas or whatever like this. That's how they tried to protect themselves from the unknown, because the unknown for humans is scary. It's risky, and we don't like the unknown. Um, and then there's always the idea of chaos, a serpent or a dragon, or and all the religions. It's kind of interesting. A woman is the one that creates the chaos. In the Jews, it was Eve tempting Adam to eat the fruit. It was the woman opening Pandora's box in the Roman religion that released chaos into the earth, and that it was always a dragon or a serpent that tempted the woman to do it. But then there's always this idea of the hero son that comes to set things back in order, to defeat the evil and the chaos, and to bring equilibrium back into the world. And we find that all the way through the idea of Jesus and all the other religions.
Is it in Buddhism?
Buddhism, he went out to discover um, what basically he was looking for, the purpose of life. And then he discovered the middle way. And so, in his ideas, uh, Buddhism, I believe, he wanted to try to figure out why there were people who suffered, people who lived in luxury, and why that is, and what would be the better way of life for humans to live. Um, and so he believed that there was a chaos, and that he would have to be the hero's son, where his father tried to hide and protect him from all the things that, with the poor people and the poverty that was also there, and to hide that from him. Uh, but then he becomes like the hero's son who goes out and finds these things, and then finds the middle way uh, to bring all people into a state of nirvana. So it's a little different, um, but they're still the same elements. And Buddhism is one of the most ancient of religions in the world. Um, but again, I believe that man has over time created these things as safeties and comfort areas. That is why, for example, when Galileo comes about, during the Renaissance. And he explains with the Catholic Church. He says, listen, the planets revolve around the sun. The sun doesn't revolve around the earth, and that the earth isn't the center of the universe. They put him in jail for that because he was breaking up the comfort zone that the Catholic Church had created in their stories about why things are. But he was using science. And so the existentialists, as time went on, they believed it was very important that science, and as we learned more from science, then we could start taking away these man-made stories of the unknown and start to replace it with now new discoveries that are really there, things that are there. And now we don't know them perfectly, but we now know why things happen, why things are the way they are on the earth. And so then what they emphasized was that now we have to, as humans, so let me put it this way. So for example, they would not say that it was wrong for, let's say, I'll say a Muslim who's really dedicated to Allah and the Quran, the teaching of the Quran. They would say if that brings him meaning in life and he believes in the providence of Allah, and then he understands why life should be the way it is, the existentialist said, okay, that's fine. That's fine. He finds a meaning in that. But what if a person's not religious at all? Do they just give up? There's no meaning? No, there's lots of meanings in life. And they should discover those things that are there. And so people who want to believe in religions to find meaning is fine, but they shouldn't take over the people who aren't religious to find their meanings in life. That everyone should be free to find what is meaningful for them in their lives. But the one thing they were against in this was hedonism. The seeking of pleasure, especially in Dr. Frankl's work, was not finding meaning at all. It was more of a disguise in a way, something that was missing in a person's life. And so it really is not meaning. So for example, let's say a man.
Well, hold on a minute. Pleasure. There's a tricky issue here. Talk earlier about the person who derives pleasure from making major contributions to mankind, or finds pleasure in creating art, or doing well at the Olympics, or being a father and being a husband or wife, and being a mother, and so on. So there's kind of a problem that people have, I think, with the issue of pleasure, and therefore, quote, hedonism and so on. It comes up in discussion of altruism. Well, I only do things to please other people. So the person is asked, well, why do you do that? Because it makes me feel good to do that. Ah, so it's your own pleasure that you're after, you see. So on the other hand, hedonism kind of refers to going to an extreme. I think probably primarily the issue of uh, how much concern the person has with regard to the quality of life of other people and their effect on the quality of life of other people. Like, well, this makes me feel good. Um, it makes you cry, but that doesn't bother me. I think that would be a kind of hedonistic. That might be one of the meanings of hedonism.
Yeah,
But it,
or like drug use. Let's say someone uses heroin to numb themselves out, um, and uh, but we know that if you head down that path, what kind of life that's gonna be actually a meaningless life. There's no meaning in using heroin.
yes,
Uh,
there is. The meaning is deriving the pleasure that the experiencing of using it provides. But that's a problematic meaning because we know that the continual use of such substances brings about various negative uh, things. One of which is that it takes more and more to produce the same good feeling, and that when the good feeling wears off, the person may feel much worse than they would have otherwise. So that's a part of the addictive process. And then it can have other effects, like the person becomes more and more desperate to not run out of their substance, and therefore uh, is willing to do most anything uh, in order to keep getting it. And that means that people who do not necessarily have high, in our minds, high ethical standards, um, uh, are now in control more of that individual. In other words, the individual has to submit to the wishes of those people who are providing the substance and so on. And so it goes on, more and more negative consequences, like the effect that this has on people important in that person's life, family, for instance.
yeah, it could go with even sexual pleasure. Let's say a man just feels that he only is out for sex, and but then once he has a sexual encounter, then it goes away until it builds back up into him again. And so there's to the existentialist, there's really no value in that. You're not really living. You're just, it's to them, it's not really living that way. There is something I wanted to mention to you that I read by Nietzsche that I thought was interesting, that you might find interesting, because of what you were talking about, how that when man was able to come up with signs, symbols, and languages, that's when man um, could uh, start to become rational. And Nietzsche wrote a whole book on that, and he believed that man really couldn't have thoughts about things until he invented symbols and languages. And I did think about this. I never really realized this. He said, when you think, do you think in a language? And I'm like, I do. If I have thoughts, I think in a language that I've learned, that I grew up with.
Yeah, that's true to a certain extent, and it's uh, kind of a choice as to where you draw the line and so on. Um, Talking about the meaning of thinking, because um, I think some would say that if you were imagining doing something with somebody that did not involve use of words, um, that you could be described as thinking. But it is true, though, that we humans, in other words, our mental activity, also includes the formation of sentences. Um, we we say things to ourselves. We imagine saying things to other people and imagine what they would say back and so on. So all of that is verbal, using symbols and the rules of syntax. Yes.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's kind of fascinating because I was thinking back to some of my experience with the Germans. I do a lot of work in Europe, and I have for like 20 years, and so I've gotten to know the German culture really well, and I'm really good friends with a lot of German people. But Germans are unique in that a lot of them know two or three different languages. They speak French, English, and German, and very fluent in those languages. And so I remember asking them, I said, when you think about something, which language do you think in?
Uh,
And they say German,
uh,
because that's the language they were brought up in, even though they know two other languages very
uh,
well. So it is interesting that when you have thoughts or think about things, other than imagining something, like you talked
yeah. And
about.
I bet the correct answer is primarily German.
Yeah, primarily German. Yes, yes. Because they could maybe
Mhm.
somehow, maybe an American thought comes in their mind. They may think of English words or something, but
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. But I thought that, and then after when I read by Nietzsche, I thought that makes sense. That, and then when I look at myself, you know, it, when I think about stuff, ideas, mainly ideas, when I think about ideas in my mind about things, I'm actually thinking in words that I've learned, that I grew up with, that are English language as Americans. And what if we didn't know how to speak words yet? How would I think?
Mhm.
So I never thought about that before. So that just was really, really interesting to me.
Well, but the undefined word in that was idea, and uh, that ideas could, it seems to me, be uh, thoughts uh, in which one is visualizing, like what is around the corner. Am I correct? Although the person would be very likely to put it into words. Now, let's see, am I correct that it's around the corner? But there might be some things that a person might imagine, um, uh, just seeing beauty in something. For instance, would that be an idea? It might be called such, it might not.
Right.
But yeah, I agree with you that our internal lives are filled with um, conversation.
It is, yeah, and even our responses, because like right now I'm reading a book on the Japanese invasion of Malaysia during World War II. They're taking of Singapore, and uh, the British generals, all their bad decisions that led to their defeat. When I read it, I'm like mentally, I'm like, wow. The word "wow" pops into my mind as an expression of my response to what I just read, but it was in my mind. I didn't say it, but the word "wow" just popped in there, um, and that comes from my my response, mental response to what I was reading, and then uh, in my mind, the word "wow" came in to my mind. You know what I mean?
In a
It's
sense, you were sharing it with yourself. hey, self, look at this. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So it is rather interesting how that works. But I just wanted to share that with you because the existentialists
Yeah.
believe that's the same way. It's quite
Mhm.
interesting. Um, but so the existentialists, though, one of the things that they were accused of, but they had to clarify, is that they were thought of as humanists. And they would say, yes, we're humanists, but what do you mean by that? Because there was back in their day, there was a bad connotation of humanists,
Mm.
of just materialists, and they were not materialists when it came to humanity. But they said, yes, if you mean um, that we exist in this world and that we, um, as they would say, that we are volitional creatures that have a consciousness, that have responsibility, then yes, we're humanists in that aspect. Um, so they,
Well, the main issue with humanism, the reason for its existence, is, I think, the need to demonstrate that one can be good without God. And um, so now that could, of course, uh, be in the context of believing that there is a God, but that's not where I get how to be a good person, or that there is not a God, but I certainly still can be a good person. And of course, that gets into, well, what's a good person? And that is a person who does what he or she should do and refrains from doing what he or she should not do. Well, how is it determined what one should or should not do? Where does that come from? And some people, scientifically oriented, might say that, well, the rules are embedded in or a part of the natural universe, not anything having to do with a God.
mm,
However, finding those rules of what one should or should not do um, becomes problematic. And so then the third position is relativism, which is generally looked down upon, but which I would have to say is where I fit, because I don't consider uh, the ethical beliefs to just be random things coming from nowhere. I believe that they are beliefs that are instilled in, passed on to us by the cultures that we're surrounded in, namely the reactions of other people. And of course, that varies considerably from culture to culture.
mm.
So,
Yeah, no, and that the existentialists, they talk a lot about that, that the culture determines a lot of your ethics that you brought up in. And um, however, they do believe that um, there are, I'm trying to say this correctly, kind of, I would say inborn in us, but there are things in nature that teaches man an ethic. So for example, let's say you grew up in Nazi Germany and they had a certain culture at the time that was dominant in their country in Germany. Um, But there were a lot of Germans who disagreed with these things because they just against their natural thinking, the things that were going on just were not right. Um, so that that you can, and it takes guts to do it. But if a person sees, or I don't want to say thinks, I'm trying to find the right words for this, maybe figures out that his culture is wrong and needs and they're doing the wrong things, that there is a more ethical way, um, that person needs to stand up for that against his culture. So
Suppose,
basically, yeah.
suppose the culture is right and the person's wrong. And then what does that mean to be right or wrong? See, I
Right.
think I think it's somebody determines, uh, agrees with or does not agree with a particular culture. Yes, we run into that problem that we find ourselves in a culture that is pretty quote unified in its thinking, in its values, its ethical values, what it should and should not do. But that culture can be sitting right next to another culture where things are substantially different. And so the person has contact outside of the culture and may begin to hear questioning of some of the things that seemed just right to the individual because because everybody agreed within that culture, and so then the person can say, well, could we all be wrong? Uh, well, I'm starting to not believe what you all believe, so I believe I am right and you are wrong. And or the culture next door, I think, is more right than you are. And I think that the problem comes in because these cultures are essentially tribes. And in order to be a good standing member in a tribe, uh, there are certain requirements. And for us humans, not chimps or bonobos, um, having the correct beliefs for that culture help to determine whether one is a satisfactory member or not.
Mm.
And we know that, in an extreme, in some Muslim countries, I understand it, if one's daughter begins to question or reject the faith, then one can kill that daughter. It would be an honor to kill him, and so on. So that's an extreme, but it's an example of tribalism and how the influence on individuals within a culture can be quite extreme.
Mm. Yeah, and it can happen for long periods of time. And I think one of the things that existentialists, uh, I think, gauge their ethic on is human misery. If there's a culture that, so for example, as humans, we do desire comfort more than no one really wants to be miserable and hurting and in pain and
By
um,
definition,
but unless they're sadomasochists. But most humans don't want to be suffering, and so um,
well, if the suffering brings pleasure,
Yeah,
And
so I mean, if they're into that kind of thing, but uh,
that goes back to the, the problem about pleasure and altruism, not being really altruism because one gets pleasure out of being altruistic and so on. It's see a lot of these problems are linguistic problems uh, where we use our words very imprecisely, and and now I would say my belief is that it is very, very important that we work toward coming to agreement, but always with the complete acceptance of the questioning of that which is agreed to, if there's some reason arising to do so. Um, so, and by the way, that reminds me, uh, um, the uh, the more concrete outcome of my thoughts along these lines, having to do with agreement and so forth, is the Humanian Belief Manual. And I'm trying to recall, I think you have visited it,
mhm.
but have not registered or participated. Um, and I think part of the reason is that for people not doing so is that it's not easy to really understand what's there. And so I have indeed completed a set of 6 tutorials that are right there that you get to when you get to the belief manual. And I still probably will make some changes to make those tutorials better. Uh, but that's something that I hope that sometime you will explore. Spend a few minutes watching the tutorials and maybe get interested in uh, participating by registering and voting on beliefs that are there and so on, and contacting others and uh, um, going to the forum to discuss issues and so on. Of course, within the constraints of the demands of time management, and so on. But anyway, that's putting in a plug for something that is has given my life meaning, by the way.
Yeah, no, that's good. I just wish that humans we didn't have to sleep. If we
Yeah,
didn't have to sleep,
yeah.
we could accomplish a lot more.
That's
Yeah, and you know what's interesting though? Um, we're talking about altruism a little bit. My personal belief is that altruism is impossible if you take the word for what it means and the ideas that people have about that. Because even you look at, for example, um, Christianity teaches altruism, but yet if you ask the Christian, why do you believe in Jesus? Because I want to go to heaven.
right.
Right? They want to go to heaven. That's why they believe in it. They want to believe it. They're not, it's impossible to be altruistic, even when you want to help someone, let's say a needy person who's poor.
You get pleasure out of it, and so it's really hedonistic.
Yeah, and it's also too that it's something you wanted to do.
Yeah,
Altruism, the idea of self-sacrificing. Um, I don't see how it's possible without you consenting to it, to want to do it,
yeah.
unless
Well, that's what I was talking about
uh,
earlier in this discussion. That it's the problem with the concept of altruism that ultimately uh, one can say, well, why are you altruistic? Well, because it gives me pleasure. Well, see, then it's really for your own pleasure. It's not. it's not altruistic and so on. So, but there may, I was talking earlier about how hedonism may refer to the issue of degree, because and the issue of degree to which the motivation is there to do good for people, in other words, to enhance other people's lives, as opposed to just wanting to enhance one's own life by what makes one's self feel good without concern about other people. And so, if there's a reduced ability to empathize, then one is going to be more hedonistic. And then there's the interesting question of what actually brings about the ability to empathize, uh, meaning what what is the uh, what is the reason that the ability to empathize uh, varies among people? Uh, why are some people less able to empathize and others more able? And I think that that has a lot to do with the child rearing experience. And one of the main uh, uh, determinants of that, I believe, is punishment. The more the child is punished, the more the child becomes oppositional and therefore not wanting to make other people feel good. That would feel more like submission and so on. So,
That's an
uh,
interesting point. Before I forget about this, but that's an interesting point because in Dr. Frankel's book, Man's Search for Meaning, he writes about that he found something that was interesting, that well, some of the Jews in the prison camps were very violent, were becoming more violent and like brute beasts. And the reason why is because they were being beaten every day and living in misery, and that every single day they saw violence, either a Nazi shooting a Jew or beating a Jew in front of them and a pile up of dead bodies. They constantly were getting beat and they constantly saw violence. And all of a sudden, they were acting like the Nazis amongst each other.
yeah,
And I thought just when you were talking about that Dr. Franco records that phenomena that was happening even amongst them. You would think that they wouldn't want to be violent, but because they were surrounded by it, they started becoming that way themselves.
well, I believe that there is uh, an established uh, correlation that has been found with regard to the more that children are punished, uh, maybe to the extent that it might be categorized as abused, the more they are likely to go out and do the same
Mm.
to other individuals in their social circle. And so that's, I mean, child rearing is extremely important. And of course, I think that this positive change that is occurring with regard to our ethics, that I have labeled humanity, uh, has it has been having an effect on our child rearing to some extent, but really at this point only to a tiny extent. Maybe not tiny, but not great yet. And it's uh, I consider child rearing to be probably one of our technically most difficult jobs, um, and there's no training for it. You don't have to get certified or anything. So
Mm.
people say, well, the way I raise my children is up to me. You stay out of it, and so on. We are getting close to our usual stopping time. Do you think that how much did we actually cover existentialism?
Covered basically the main framework of it,
Uh-huh.
but not really anything in depth, like a certain point, like ethics, how they find their ethics, um, um,
Well,
how they would, find the actual meaning of life, a meaning that someone could find value in.
so we
Uh,
have reason to discuss it some more.
Yeah, and they actually go into a lot of what it means to be free. So they believe that the human was free, but they go in depth about that, based upon circumstances, what you're born into,
Uh-huh.
stature, and what all that entails. So
Yeah,
they're
what
very
does
in depth.
it mean to be free? Free from what? And that's, I think, it's almost a strange concept. No, that's not correct. I would not say that. There are strange aspects to it. Uh, it's uh, but like you pointed out with objectivism, um, their basic one of their basic ideas is that one should be free to do anything that one wants to do as long as it doesn't impede upon others' ability to do the same
Mhm.
or does not have a negative impact on other people. But uh, there are problems even with that, as I think we have discussed in the past, but we may discuss again. But okay, so those are some things to continue. So we can plan maybe to continue on existentialism next time.
Yeah.
And so, are you okay with us continuing our discussions as we've been?
Yes, yeah, and also too, I'm reading a lot of um, Dr. Frankel's work on his logotherapy, so maybe I'll have more to share on that. It's really in depth, and you have to really read it carefully to grasp it. And um, so I want to maybe we can talk a little bit. I can bring up something that
Yeah.
he talked about that we can discuss.
And I hope you do go back to your original project of reading one chapter a week in my book on the mind body problem, which is available free to everyone on the website.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'll definitely, and I'll start looking into the manual too. And
that would be
um,
great.
yeah, that sounds like it's sufficient. Yeah, I'll make a point of doing that.
Listening to the tutorials is and viewing the tutorials would be, I think, the best way to do that.
Okay.
So, okay, well, then I guess this is where we can stop and go listen to the news and see how we humans have been behaving
Uh,
today. Uh, so,
all right, Bill.
okay,
All
take
right.
care. You
You
have
too. We'll see you.
you
Bye.
have a good week.
Humanity, now we all can see. Humanity, how much better